everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Purple Insider Fantasy Podcast Show with Mike Schopp of the Deep End Fantasy Podcast and my old teammate at WGR 550 in Buffalo. And our show here, our weekly fantasy analysis, is presented by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Super happy to have them along board. And Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports, also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. So you want to sign up over at Underdog Fantasy with the promo code PURPLE to claim your special pick and your first time deposit offer up to $250 in bonus cash. And if you can't remember the promo code, it's just PURPLE, but we'll leave a link below in the description as well. Mike, what is going on? How we doing, man?
Well, I feel like we should talk about my helmets. I meant to bring this up last week. I moved them around a little bit, but as you're starting today with me, I'm realizing I've got a Packers helmet, and could I do worse for your show? Look at your pennants, so strategically placed with the Vikings over your left shoulder and the Bills over your right. Like the two teams I can actually see are the Vikings and the Bills. I doubt that's a coincidence. And I have a collection of Super Bowl MVP signed minis. And, you know, I do have a Bills helmet down here, even though I think they've never won one. But for my birthday one year, my kids bought me this because they knew I collected mini helmets. I do not have a Vikings one. Maybe I should have a Vikings one. Maybe I just shouldn't display the Packers.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers being right there visibly is a little bit of a swipe. There. Although the thing about Vikings fans is they totally get it. There's a lot of Packers fans who live in Minnesota, and everybody completely gets it. They win all the time. They always have great quarterbacks. They're kind of just right over there across the state line. So
kindred spirits. Yes.
I don't think that they're that offended. It is a little bit different because there are rivalries that have some true rage behind them. And then there's let's eat our brats together and then go into the stadium and cheer for our respective teams. If you go to Philadelphia, they may assault you if you wear purple, but you walk through Lambeau and that parking lot, you got Vikings fans, Packers fans, everybody gets it. It's kind of it's a very Midwest type of thing.
Yes. And we love that. So I just know I'm new on the team here. Your current team, I don't want to offend. And that was just a random thing, but I do not have a Vikings helmet. We'll try to get some different teams. You know, you look a little bit this way. We've got Pittsburgh. They're just hanging on little knobs on a cabinet, trying to impress.
Well, if you were collecting Super Bowl helmets and that was the goal, everyone understands that you wouldn't have a Vikings one yet. But maybe you can get a Fran Tarkenton signed mini helmet or something.
I love the Vikings helmet too. I mean, it's one of the great helmets. No stripe. We learned from Dean many years ago. If you have a stripe on your helmet, you don't get it. Like the best helmets, the Chiefs, the Vikings do not have a stripe. The Eagles. And I set out to collect all the Super Bowl MVPs. This was 20 years ago when I started, but then I realized, plus they were super expensive. I really didn't want Tom Brady or, Aaron Rodgers. I didn't want those guys. So I decided to cut the collection off at 30. We've got everybody 1 through 30, which I'm very excited about and proud of. But yeah, no Vikings. A lot of teams are missing.
Unfortunately, maybe someday that you'll get the Bills one signed by the MVP or the Vikings one signed by the MVP. But until then, we'll talk about fantasy football instead. And hey, maybe the driving force. I wanted to start out because I always want to start out with the Vikings topic here, and then we'll dive into stuff. And then I have another Underdog fantasy best ball draft for you to assault me about like you did last week.
Sorry,
but
you asked.
Every fantasy show that I go on. So you've heard me on the XM fantasy shows that I'll go on as a guest, and they're always asking me, how's Jefferson going to do? How's the quarterback going to do? And that's, of course, I'm happy to answer that. But the answer for Jefferson is always pretty good. And the quarterback now is, I'm not sure, but I wanted to bring to the table 2 fantasy sleepers just for you that I think could get off to a good start with the Minnesota Vikings this year. And those are Jalen Nailor and Johnny Mundt. Are you familiar with these players in any way, shape, or form?
Johnny Mundt, the 8th-year tight end out of Oregon who played with Justin Herbert. I think I am. Nailor is new to me this year. You know, these are sleepers with a capital S I mean, these are sleepers. In underdog drafts, I don't think I've ever seen either name this year. And in home league drafts, which I think maybe more of your viewership is sort of in tune with, you definitely won't see either of these players drafted. I think Nailor is a little bit interesting. Right now in fantasy, we're trying to figure out who are the guys we've been ignoring that might be relevant. One seemingly such player is Ray McLeod in Atlanta. So Atlanta has everybody excited with Cousins. They're going to play a modern offense. Zach Robinson, but they have very few skill players anybody can name. Like, it's really just a very short list. They're all top 10 draft picks, but there's just only 3. I mean, that's it. You have Algier as the backup running back. So what happens after London and Pitts? Yikes. Rondale Moore broke his leg, and this is an answer about Jalen Nailor, but Ray McLeod seems to be in a starting role. You read the camp blurbs, and okay, he's somebody on a Cousins team I can justify taking at the end of a draft. You want to be thinking in your home league drafts, some of these players at least are going to be cut. I'm going to have to cut them. I'm going to have an injury to my starting running back. I'm going to need someone else. And these are the players that tend to be the players you cut in those situations. This is also, it's Minnesota. I would defer to you. I feel like Nailor maybe is somewhat similar to McLeod in that they really might have a wide receiver 3 role on a team that throws it all the time. I mean, almost no team is more that than Minnesota. Mundt, I don't know. You get past 8 or 9 tight ends, and while there are some interesting names later on, Tyler Conklin, Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, even Colby Parkinson, they're really all the same. And so I don't think you should really have to take any chances with that. You're going to tell me that Mundt is going to start week 1 and, maybe get 5 or 6 targets. That's okay. If he falls into the end zone, then you win on that bet. But I don't think you want to be starting him, right?
Starting him might be a little bit of a stretch because you might have Travis Kelce instead. So you'd probably want to go that direction. If you are in a deeper league, though, the first 5-6 weeks might be Johnny Mundt as their starting tight end. As we've gone along, there has been no sign whatsoever that TJ Hockenson is about to get back on this field.
Mm-hmm.
And he is still working out on the side. He's still inside during padded practices. And when you just consider what he went through with the MCL first having to heal and then the ACL injury, it took even longer. So this wasn't like him getting hurt in week, I think it was 16 that he actually got hurt. This was more like him getting hurt 3 or 4 weeks into the offseason and then trying to recover and come back, which means he may not be here until midway through the year. Now, of course, you'd prefer to have your Kyle Pitts be your starting tight end all the way through the season, but Sam Darnold keeps throwing the ball to Johnny Mundt, and he has good hands, and he caught a lot of passes last year when TJ Hockenson was out for those couple of games. And the Vikings have this offense where they run receivers downfield a lot, and the tight end are just around, open underneath for a lot of plays. And we saw that from Hockenson, where he averaged maybe only like 9 or 10 yards a catch, but he got a gazillion catches. This is something that Johnny Mundt, I think, could do. That one I'm not as strong on. That is a deep sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
But if he plays 6 or 7 weeks, I mean, you're getting a lot of action there, I think. With Jalen Nailor, he is extremely intriguing, in part because Jordan Addison suffered a sprained ankle. We don't know for sure if he's going to come back week 1, which would put Jalen Nailor as wide receiver 2 at this point. And even if he's wide receiver 3, there's really been no contest that he's wide receiver 3. This team loves 11 personnel. They're going to throw it to him, I think, a lot. He's also been someone that they've been super high on for years. It's just that he's been injured and he hasn't had a chance to really shine. But Kevin O'Connell has brought him up 100 times from the time that he first came into the league until he was here. But just 2 years ago, he didn't have an opportunity with KJ Osborne as wide receiver 3. There's a lot of chances here, and not to mention the potential looming suspension at some point for Jordan Addison. So could be a week or 2 at the beginning of the season, could be a week or 3 at the end of the season with a suspension, and the next man up is going to be Jalen Nailor.
Well, that's the good stuff right there. I mean, in fantasy football, we're paying as close attention as we can to all the beat reporters, all the people who are close to the inside. You're mentioning how many times O'Connell has said his name is something, even if I didn't know you, I would take interest in, because, that's what we're trying to do here is who are the guys we've been sleeping on. These tournaments at Underdog have been running for months, some of them. I mean, the big Best Ball Mania 5 has been up since, the spring, as soon as the NFL draft is over. And there are tournaments that started before that. And an important edge, is finding these guys. I'll give you two names from last year that were these guys. That I'm not saying Jalen Nailor will be this, but Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams for the Rams were just nobodies. Williams was a little bit interesting the year before. He got hurt on the opening kickoff of the first game of the season and went away. And Nacua was a rookie. Nobody mentioned their names ever on any show all summer. And then you get closer to the end, and what's happening there? Kupp is injured. Who takes that spot? Maybe it's Tutu Atwell. I sort of leaned into that a little bit because there was draft capital with him, and he played some, but Nacua was one of the greatest rookie receivers in history, and Williams was a league winner. And, speaking of home leagues, nobody ever drafted either guy in any home league draft. There was no reason to. So that was something to learn from last year. And players like Nailor, especially considering what you said about Addison and his health and his possibly being suspended, that is the door open on a great offense. That's important too. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks. You want to make sure you're keying on the teams where you feel like you can trust what you know about them. There's been a consistency. That's Kevin O'Connell. And then we also like what it looks like in terms of pass volume for receivers. So I think after all this having been said, that Nailor is somebody to pay attention to. And in these Underdog tournaments, I think he's a good idea if you end up on the Vikings, which is also, every team is different for this too, Matt, with Darnold going so much later than some other quarterbacks. You can end up sort of backdoor stacking Minnesota. Even better if you have Jefferson early, and they play Green Bay in week 17. Sorry to mention Green Bay again, but that's good for where the big money is won in these tournaments. You could end up tacking Nailor on in a round 18 final round to a Viking stack. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think with someone like Nailor, if we look at what KJ Osborne did and think about KJ Osborne in 2021 had 0 catches. I don't even think he had any targets. I'm not even sure he had any offensive snaps. Or was it 2020? And then 2021, he comes out and in the first week, he gets like 7 catches because through the offseason, he emerged and became someone that they liked. And that's what we've seen from Jalen Nailor. He's not taken third team reps or anything. I mean, he's out there with the first team as their number 3 receiver over and over again. And I think in a team like this, where Kevin O'Connell is always going to lean into passing the ball, even if Nick Mullins or Josh Dobbs is playing, then someone like Nailor, and he's been good. I mean, he catches the ball. He's good contested catches. He's very fast. His nickname is Speedy. I don't know if you knew that, but yes. I mean, that's enough to draft him right there. The guy, though, that I'm not quite coming out of camp as high on as a sleeper that a lot of people ask me about fantasy-wise is Ty Chandler. Now, the health issue with Aaron Jones is serious when it's an older running back. I think they want Aaron Jones to just play until he drops. I mean, he's just such a terrific all-around running back, and Ty Chandler is very hit or miss. He's rocket fast, but I'm not sure that he really gets the details in the same way Jones does. And I'm not super sold that, and I can't project injuries. I'm just not super sold that it's going to be a duo. It feels like it's going to be about 70-30 to me.
Well, yes, we talked last week. You made a point about his failure to pick up a pass block read. And we know how important that, we should know how important that is to coaches. And that's just to bring that back up, something that you will not find in stats. You have to, that's where it's especially important to pay attention to what coaches are doing. And even sometimes saying, the more you trust the coach to tell you the truth, the better. But I know you're coming from a good place when it comes to O'Connell. And, Madison in Minnesota before Chandler now, Jerome Ford in Cleveland, maybe Zamir White. They're in Vegas. There are these next man up running backs that were often really good college players that look like they're just sort of obvious for the one injury away scenario. And that what happened with Madison behind Dalvin Cook, most people, at least this was my read, Matthew, maybe yours is different, but there was a lot of negativity toward Dalvin Cook in terms of efficiency, one injury away. This is a different coaching staff too, or part of that tenure. But look out if Cook goes down for Alexander Madison, who wasn't good though. Like he wasn't somebody that was any more efficient. And so you had those couple of weeks where the volume was there and that was a good fantasy result, but really like never a good enough player. And so I'm not saying that's true of Chandler. That's sort of a different point. But the names I mentioned, we kind of all are just sort of champing at the bit for one injury away. This guy that I picked in round 14 is going to be even better than the starter who we picked in round 5. I don't know. Like there's you coaches don't get we condescend to them. Like why don't they do this obvious thing that we all think is better? But they know stuff too. So I respect what you're saying on Chandler. I will admit, after last week's conversation, I was a little bit slower to click on his name this week than last. And, also more eager to click on Jones. I've always liked Jones. I don't know if he's washed or what, but they did pay him and he does catch the ball, which is Minnesota's MO. So I think he could be good value. He just has to stay on the field like all these guys.
Yeah, I think people are maybe a little too worried about him from an age perspective because it was never quick twitch that made him great. It's seeing the holes, hitting them, toughness, catching the ball. He is really really bright. I mean, he's one of the smartest football players you're going to come across. So I think he really understands what the goals are for running the football, which is maybe an underrated skill, is just understanding how the play is supposed to work and how the defense is operating, how they're lined up, where things are going to present themselves. And then he's just got great hands. I mean, Chandler catches the ball when you throw it to him too, but I think that Jones is a difference maker with his hands, which means that they could try to use that a lot more. So that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. He could get hurt in week 1 and none of this matters, but that's how I feel right now.
And just quickly on Jones, I mean, a lot of these guys, we talk about age model stuff, Jacobs in Green Bay or Barkley, like we're trying to guess, like, what do they have left? Aaron Jones had back-to-back 100-yard games in last year's playoffs and catches the ball too. So that's pretty recent.
No, it is. And I think that they've managed his workload pretty well here during training camp. Now, I made a list of a few guys that I think are boom or bust. Now, you might tell me that's not a boom or bust guy. What are you talking about? But I like that angle too. So as I've been going through and doing these drafts, thinking, man, if I hit this one, this guy's going to be great. So I've got a couple obvious ones and a couple of a little bit lower on the list. The first one I want to start with is Anthony Richardson, because I was a very large Anthony Richardson enjoyer with him coming out of college and loved what I saw from him early on with his command of the offense. I think that the throwing, though, is going to have to make a huge improvement for him to be amazing. Is he a boom or bust guy? And am I on the right side of it by saying I would like him on my fantasy team?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the bust with Richardson really is probably only if he gets hurt. You can't overstate the value of running quarterbacks in fantasy football. So you have a player here that the team is heavily invested in, and there's no question about his potential as a runner. You can question, especially after what happened last year, how much they want to let him run the ball. But so far, it sounds like you draft this player, you're going to use him you're going to play to his strengths, and so I'm not too worried about that. It's right to be a little bit just cognizant of what happened last year, which was he played in 4 games and he left 3 with injury, and 1 was for the season. Like he'll have to learn. Everybody is saying this. He'll have to learn how to protect himself. So big and so lethal as a runner, you might feel like, what do I have to worry about? But that did happen last year. So I love my Richardson teams. In underdog tournaments, you always want to have some stack, pair with a receiver or 2 or even 3, because you're almost dead to win the big money without that. You can have the very best player at every position, but if they're not correlated in those playoff weeks, you're going to win your 12-team, 14-week regular season prize and go out in week 15 and double up, and it will have been a great team, but not quite right for the underdog tournaments. So with Richardson, that's a little bit challenging. That's Michael Pittman before Richardson. You might want to set up for that, and then you have to hope that Richardson makes it to you. That does happen with Pittman going late third and then Richardson late fifth. So they're on the same side of the board. And then Josh Downs, don't forget about him, even though he has a high ankle sprain. That's going to be a couple weeks into the season, probably. And then he should be their number 2 receiver. And A.D. Mitchell has had a nice camp, it seems. So you do have options with the Colts. I wouldn't just draft Richardson or any quarterback by themselves. If you can avoid it, you should avoid it. But love the idea of him, and I'm definitely in.
I think the high end is a Cam Newton type of 10 touchdown rushing, 20 touchdown passing type of season for Anthony Richardson. And the Colts could be the team that is not getting talked about a ton, and they end up winning the division or something. I'm always trying to think, who don't we expect to win a division or be way better? And that might be one of those teams. The next guy on my list was Malik Neighbors. I really like what I see from Malik Neighbors and a little bit of preseason action. In college, he was as freakish as anybody that you're ever going to see. And I think he was every bit the prospect of Marvin Harrison. It's just that his quarterback, not so sure that I really trust Daniel Jones or that I even trust Brian Dable to push down the pass button as much as someone like Kevin O'Connell with Daniel Jones. I think he likes running quarterback keepers with him and stuff as much as he does throwing the ball downfield. How do you feel about Malik Neighbors? But I think the high end of that is that he's just ridiculous right away as a boom or bust. Folks, US Cellular noticed that the way we use our phones has gotten to be ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu is on a QR code. That's ironic. We hit like on social media posts that we don't actually like. Ironic. Which is why US Cellular has created Us Mode to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less ironically. A phone company wanting people to use their phones less? Ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from US Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/built for us to get started.
Yeah, what the floor should be is easily, not even close. Who would even be second? The number 1 target earner on his team. And Dable is at least respectable in this area. So, I mean, top 10 pick, they've got to feed Malik Neighbors. It might surprise you to know where he goes in drafts. Like, you have to decide between Neighbors and Mike Evans or Devontae Smith. I mean, that's the end of the second round. I pick Neighbors. If I have CeeDee Lamb at 102 or even 101, sometimes I hope that I can get Neighbors and Smith, NFC East, in the second 2-3 turn. So he goes early. He's drafted like we know he's going to produce big time. And that is a little bit of a guess with the things you said about the Giants. There's just nothing else they should do on offense than get the ball to him. So if you get 10 targets out of the gate per game from Neighbors, which I don't think is aggressive, and he's good, holy cow. I mean, late second round, you haven't drafted Puka, if that happens, who you picked up on waivers or something. It's not that you need a good season from your second round pick, but Neighbors is certainly capable of it. And I prefer him to Evans. Smith and he, for me, are about the same because I like Devontae Smith a lot too. And by the way, the Colts and the Giants play week 17. So if you somehow land a team with Neighbors and Richardson, and they maybe Downs, you probably can't get Pittman this way, but Neighbors, Richardson, Downs, or Mitchell, that could be really good because that's a week 17 matchup, and that's where you win the life-changing money. That's what we're here for.
What I thought was really interesting is that the draft that we're going to go over in a couple minutes that I did recently, Neighbors went ahead of Travis Kelce, ahead of DJ Moore, ahead of Zay Flowers. I mean, some guys like Amari Cooper, Michael Pittman that are much more proven than a rookie player. And we can kind of project that DJ Moore is going to get the football a ton. Christian Kirk also he went ahead of, who there's not that many other people to throw to in Jacksonville other than Brian Thomas looking better recently. That's a high price. I feel like if you're
Yep.
going in on him, that you have to compare him to bigger samples that you know about. And I think that's one of the more difficult things to figure out with fantasy is rookies might just be bad. Like you never really know, right? Versus someone like Michael Pittman, who I think is a guarantee to get the football a ton.
Well, everything is a guess. And I think you'll find as you dive back more into fantasy football, and you can read on this. I mean, this is kind of almost the groupthink take now. You, to say the least, you cannot be afraid of rookies, and you even probably want to lean into them because you're still playing against people who will make the point about what they have seen before, what's been proven, quote proven. There can be injuries though that tilt that the other way. Neighbors, and I mean Harrison goes at the end of the first round sometimes. Underdog players are not afraid to place their bets on these guys. Odunze is a little bit, less expensive. He's like round 6, and then you have Worthy, and Worthy is past Odunze now with all the Chiefs hype. But I mean, I will say conservatively, you don't want to be afraid of the rookies. And the way I play, I want all of them. I want all the rookie running backs in the last 4 or 5 rounds, whoever I can afford, the Ray Davises, Braylon Allen, Corum in LA, these guys, I want those guys on my team because they're all in situations where the starter gets hurt. This isn't Chandler or Jerome Ford or players who've been in the league and not been able, Rico Dowdle in Dallas, not been able to sort of emerge. These are rookies where you never know. And the more rookies on my teams, the more I like them.
Rico Dowdle sounds totally fake. That is not a real person.
You don't think so?
No, that's completely made up. George Pickens is the next guy on my list.
Well, you know what, Matthew? Once a week, starting next week, I will make up a name and we'll see if you catch it.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. It's just you could be like, oh, and James Babelson, he's I think in line to be the 3rd tight end for Miami, and he's going to be pretty good there. He had that great Oregon State career. Yeah, just keep going until
under the radar.
I think that guy's real. George Pickens, though, next on my list, because I am not quite sure who's throwing to him. And one thing I know about Justin Fields is that if he ends up playing a lot, he might just not throw it at all. He might end up with 2,200 passing yards. And I know DJ Moore had a decent season last year as the number 1 wide receiver there, but they're going to run the ball. Fields is going to run himself because he doesn't see the field and he's going to scramble. George Pickens might throw a helmet and get suspended after 2 weeks or something because he's not getting passes. I just don't like that whole situation with the way the quarterback thing is playing out.
Yeah, I have to really think hard on this because I just watched a preseason game, Buffalo-Pittsburgh, and the Steelers looked like they could be the worst offense in the league. And I know every year there's a lot of pessimism toward the Steelers, like this is the year they're bad, and then they never are. But I'm so betting on that to finally happen this year, like 5 wins. I mean, come on. So, that's my take on the team. What happens with George Pickens if I'm right? That could go either way. If they're behind all the time and Russell Wilson finds his moon balls again, that could be huge for Pickens. I mean, late last season, he had huge weeks, and I don't know, who was it, Rudolph or Trubisky, whoever it was. Like, that's in the range of outcomes for him, but so is the blow up. And I don't know, like, he's a tough click. When you get to pick 40 or about where he goes, obviously you don't have the Steelers quarterback yet. You don't have any Steelers yet. And you have to, decide if you want to try to build that. And I usually don't. I'd rather pick Amari Cooper in that range. They're very close in ADP. So are the elite quarterbacks. Allen, Hurts, Mahomes are all in that same range. The elite tight ends are all in that same range. So my perfect draft, I'll have drafted 2 receivers early, maybe even 3. And then when it comes to pick about where George Pickens goes, I'm not in, because there's some other idea I like more. It's certainly to be respected that he might be great. Like, there is tons of talent with him. There's just a little bit too much of the the combination of wild card kind of personality stuff and Arthur Smith. I mean, that team could just be really bad. And my prediction is that they will be.
I didn't like anything they did at that position this offseason in the offensive coordinator or at the quarterback spot. Get two guys who, I mean, Russell Wilson is washed. I mean, it's all sorts of over. There was a minute there where they won some games, including against the Vikings on a last second. And sometimes you go, wait, did you watch the game? Like Russell Wilson was horrible for 3.5 quarters, launched a ball fluttering to the end zone that a guy reached up and grabbed to win the game. And it was
what a game.
Russell. It was a entertaining contest. But I mean, that wasn't proof that Russell Wilson was suddenly back. And, Sean Payton, he's getting the most out of Wilson now. Are you serious? Like, that was a horrendous game that he played from the quarterback position, and they got a couple wins, but then that quickly went away at the end of the year. And Justin Fields, I got an up close view on for his entire career so far, and he just cannot throw the ball. And it's not that he can't throw it when he actually lets it go. I mean, he won't throw it. He just gets sacked over and over. It's like Rob Johnson, where, I know you've got the talent to throw the ball. Could you please do that? And he just gets sacked. So I just can't see. And with Arthur Smith, he's going to hand off 87% of the time. That's just going nowhere. I don't like that at all for Pickens. But then there's some other world where he's the only guy you throw to. And even on bad teams, if you're the only guy you throw to, you still end up racking up 8 catches in a game. The quarterback completes 12 and you got 8 of them. That does end up happening. What do you think of Travis Etienne?
Ooh, he is right at that exact same spot on the board, like pick 40. That's really more of I'll answer this in 2 parts. Drafting wise, that's really more of a build decision. Do you want Etienne as your number 1 running back? You probably wouldn't pick another one for a couple of rounds. I wouldn't. If I do that, I don't hate it. The other part of it, so, that depends on your roster construction, and I would never draft him as a running back 2. But if you've started with 2 receivers or even 3, that happens a lot, where Etienne is a reasonable pick in the early 4th. And, okay. The rest of it, so last year, they knew what they were doing. At the end of the year, they called it a mistake. They just ran him into the ground. I mean, he's not the biggest guy. You don't see bell cows so much anymore in the league. Tank Bigsby, his backup, was a disaster as a rookie. And so here we were watching Travis Etienne get all the touches. Great if you're starting him in this first 6-7 weeks of the season. Underdog, we're trying to win late. And what happened? Maybe for the second year in a row, there was no juice left by the playoff weeks for Etienne. The question is, do they want to adjust that? And I think they might. And Bigsby has had a good camp, they say, like sort of back from the dead is Tank Bigsby. So I think optimally, Jacksonville sort of stretches out Etienne and makes him worth more later in the season, which could be good for us. But at the same time, that means they're cutting into his workload early. So that takes some of his value away, and never the most efficient guy. Like I've had lots of Etienne teams. If you close your eyes and try to picture a Travis Etienne like in college, he's running wild. But if you picture a Jacksonville play, to me, he's getting the ball at the 4 and getting stopped at the 3. Like I've just seen 20 plays like that from Travis Etienne, I feel. So doesn't feel great, not afraid to do it if I've started 2 or 3 receivers. So I have some Etienne, but I'm not the most confident that it's a great pick. How's that?
Travis Etienne is the type of guy who I would make an argument against drafting running backs because you have to play them. If you in a certain role, if you draft the guy and he's not Jonathan Taylor, they'll still play him as if he is Jonathan Taylor. And I just haven't seen Etienne at any point in his career convince me that he can be one of those guys. And I think if he was a 4th round draft pick, then he would be a duo type of guy or a running back 2 on another team based on his talent. But no, we drafted him. He's got to be our guy. Also, Tank Bigsby back from the dead sounds like an 80s movie, right?
And that is a real person.
That is
By
a
the
real
way,
person.
yes,
That also
yes.
falls into the category of maybe might not be.
We're starting next week on that.
Right. But I knew of him, but I thought that really does sound like a fake name. I'm just kind of out on him, but I was curious if I was missing something. When his name came up high in drafts, I thought, I don't know. I just don't
No,
feel like there's a high end there.
what you can do is try to think about, so round four, early six. If I draft ETN, I might not be able to afford another running back in six. So who's the receiver I'm getting early six? It might be Brian Thomas. It might be Deontay Johnson. Okay, I mean, that can work. Or you end up picking, I like Amari Cooper. I mentioned him when we talked about Pickens. Cooper or Pickens in four. And then in six, you're looking at maybe David Montgomery, sometimes even James Cook. If you believe in Kamara, I just think that's a better play. I'd rather draft the receiver in four and the running back in six than the other way around. And that pretty much freezes me out on ETN.
All right. Before you take a look at this next draft that I did and see if I did better than last week on Underdog, give me one. Give me a boom or bust guy that you love as the boom.
Well, I already said, like, I will draft as many rookies as I can get away with. Worthy is kind of obvious in that way. And I'm just thinking about the rookies. Thomas is kind of exciting too on that same Jacksonville team. It sounds like he's been putting on a show there. And I think Kirk is good. And they paid Davis. I think Davis just sort of gets written off too easily. Man, if Thomas has it, that could. I think Lawrence is good. I mean, there's pushback on that now, but I still think Trevor Lawrence is good. So I'm not drafting a lot of Brian Thomas. I'm trying to come up with the perfect answer for you. Oh boy. I mean, boom or bust, that's like sort of the late, by definition, kind of the late rounds, somebody that you're just throwing in at the end and are willing to take a zero from. One guy that I'm thinking about, but it can't be my answer, is Marvin Mims, because Denver just cannot seem to bring itself to trust him. Like, he's somebody as a rookie I drafted a lot of, and like, okay, there's an opening here. Judy's not great. This should be, this should be there. Sean Payton, and it just wasn't. And this year is starting like it wasn't either. Oh boy, I got to think of the right answer for this. You know how I like to be perfect. So boom or bust that I just love as a boom.
I will say on Marvin Mims, if a coaching staff doesn't trust the wide receiver, just run away, because that means the guy
Yeah.
can't get the routes right, the depth, reading the defense. He'll never be able to figure that out.
I do think the way I'm thinking about this is through the bust. And sorry, but I am thinking about this through the bust because somebody that I think there is real upside for, but again, like, zeros are possible. Will you live with this answer? Because I don't want to take all day. Will you live with Drake May as an answer to this question?
Yeah, sure. I like that. Yeah, I like that
I mean,
because the boom side, though, how high can the boom be?
high. Well,
Think so?
not all the way high because of the surrounding talent, right? I think New England is not going to be prolific at all this year on offense, but I really like the player. I thought he should have been the second pick. And, he flashed a little bit in the second preseason game. They did draft two receivers as well in Polk and Baker. Douglas is kind of interesting. I don't think it has to be as bad as everybody else sort of sounds about the Patriots, like worst team in the league kind of stuff. Maybe. I think the sooner they put him in, the better. And I kind of think he's not undeniable, but I think the way Brissett has looked in the preseason too, which is not good, they'll get to May earlier than basically how we've been drafting him and that team through the summer. So in a redraft league, in a tournament, what? Like, this could have been McCarthy, actually, had he not been injured. There would have been a possible outcome that he doesn't play like at all. And that's a bust, right, for one season. But I don't think that happens in New England. And I think maybe May, they're still talking about week one being possible for him. The beat reporters seem kind of split on that idea. Yeah, I like drafting him. It's cheap. And all those receivers, Kendrick Bourne, even Tyquan Thornton, are available right at the end. you can sometimes save your draft. It has to happen. It has to work. But you can kind of feel like you've saved your draft by stacking 2 or 3 Patriots at the end. So I'll go with May.
Well, and there is, you talk about the end of the season being important. There is a chance with May that he comes along.
That's right.
And even if there's some rocky moments early on, if you're doing best ball, you've probably got some other quarterback who's outperforming him. But when you get to the end, if he's clicking and he's starting to become that top draft pick quarterback, he could have huge days and he could be your best quarterback over a couple of weeks.
Right.
And if you're making a late round pick, because now just with underdog, I'm thinking of everything through best ball kind of viewpoint. And I think that does make sense. I like the answer. So we can move on.
He can be a quarterback too with Allen, say, for instance. They play weeks 16 and 18, which is weird. So there aren't 2 Bills Patriots games in your fantasy schedule. Usually you can sort of like the idea of pairing division opponents. But Allen, your bet is he's going to be QB1. May at the end, they do play week 16, which is a fantasy playoff week. I don't want to draft 2 quarterbacks that meet in week 17, but 15, 16, fine. So that kind of works.
Okay, on to my draft. Now this one, I'm going to screen share this so you can see it. So here's the whole board from the draft. Now this one had 12 teams that were going at it.
All right.
Which made it a little bit more challenging. So I'm just going to kind of run down some picks here and you can take a look and you can tell me when you want to talk about one. Justin Jefferson, I went 3rd overall because Justin Jefferson, and that seemed pretty obvious.
Fine.
Am I too quick on Kyren Williams at number 22, which was my 2nd pick? I didn't think so because I really love what I think he's going to do there. I think he's going to be the bell cow, get a ton of touches. I like Sean McVay in the running game. I don't know if that's interesting to you. I may have gone tight end a little early with Sam Laporta after that. Then,
so what I would say here is before you scroll down, I don't want you to scroll down yet.
Yeah.
From drafting literally hundreds of underdog teams, I want to see how you ended up at receiver, because like look at team 1 and we'll see how team 1 ended up at other positions. And this is not a tournament.
All receivers. Yep.
Yeah. That's what you tend to see. Look at team 6 with 4 straight, you see a lot of orange in the top, and the risk, just from experience, the risk you run not drafting receivers in those rounds is who do you end up with that feels good at all. Kyren Williams, I think, is a fine pick, but I'd rather, and I'm in the tournament space, and this is not a tournament, so I have to make sure I point that out. I don't want to keep saying it, but it does change things. I'd want to see if he comes back to me in 3.
Yeah.
And, if he doesn't, then I keep waiting. But there's no problem with wanting to bet on him, I think. So that's fine. And that's close to where he goes.
Yeah. And I did consider someone like Deebo Samuel. He's going to get the ball a lot. And Marvin Harrison. So I went Sam Laporta with my next pick because Detroit just loves the heck out of him. Then Anthony Richardson, our boomer bust guy, with 46. I decided to go kind of all in on that. And you asked about the wide receivers.
Okay.
So as I scroll down a little bit here, I got Mixon in the 5th, but then I went Addison, Smith-Njigba, Sutton, and Samuel in 4 straight picks. And those guys aren't the biggest names, but I could also see all of them as either wide receiver 2s or their team's only wide receiver 1 in the case of Cortland Sutton, still racking up a lot of numbers. And so I felt that I got one of the best running backs and one of the best tight ends early in exchange for a lot of wide receivers later.
Yeah, really, you might have gotten away with it. Like, that's what you had to do, whether you knew it or not. In rounds 5 through 8, that is what you had to do to catch up at receiver with just Jefferson to that point. Like, Jefferson is your only receiver in the first 4 rounds, if I remember right. So this is absolutely what you need to do. You don't need to think about stacking so much. I'm not sure you did, whether Darnold is on this team or not. You already have 2 quarterbacks by Herbert as I look at it. But I like the players. Smith-Njigba, fine. Samuel's hurt now, but, that could be a short-term injury. Fine. Sutton, we talked about last week, fine. Through 8 rounds, I think you're pretty good here. But you needed these receivers or else you were probably dead.
what's important is that you can't prove that I didn't do it on purpose.
No,
So
well, I mean, I
think
would
I
ask
could
you.
just,
I would ask
right.
you.
I think I could just say that I did. Yeah, Justin Herbert comes up here. There was a little bit of a run on quarterback, so I needed to jump in. Herbert is not being pumped up a lot from what I understand, but I think he's still going to be really good and put up big numbers. Even if he doesn't have the receivers, Jim Harbaugh is going to throw the ball with him. That's why Jim Harbaugh showed up there, aside from many investigations in college. Hunter, I got Hunter Henry. I really liked Demario Douglas, that idea of getting a New England wide receiver. They're going to throw to someone, so I got both of those guys. Tyler Conklin maybe was a stretch here. I also know Tyler Conklin from covering him and feel like he's someone that Aaron Rodgers will come to trust.
Yep.
Took a swing at Roman Wilson, took a swing at Rashad Bateman, finally having the Rashad Bateman season. Miles Sanders in Carolina is probably a terrible pick. And then Sam Darnold at the end, because why not? He's going to play and he's going to throw the ball a lot. And what I know about Sam Darnold is Sam Darnold is capable of having hysterically amazing games throughout his career. There's not a million of them, but there's enough to pick him with the dead last pick in the entire draft.
Yeah, and I'm not so well schooled in these 12 teamers. So I'm guessing that you're probably right to want to draft 3. I don't know that you'll have to do that. Your number 1 quarterback is Richardson, so your bet is that Richardson's amazing. And I think anybody from Richardson up could be quarterbacks that I would feel okay drafting 2. Or else, like, if Richardson, you could escape because you drafted 3, but you're going to need some of your late round picks to come through. Otherwise, you need Richardson to win. Like, Richardson is the guy that, with that early in investment, it's not early in terms of draft capital. It's just like, that's your team now. So when you're drafting like this, I think you want to sort of process, who am I betting on, and then sort of embrace the risk that comes from that, which is, I'm not going to draft a 3rd quarterback because if Richardson doesn't hit, I'm dead anyway. I'm glad you have Darnold because you have Jefferson and Addison. So that I like. Look at team 12, just for the fun of it. That's 3 quarterbacks. McCarthy, when was this draft?
This was right before McCarthy got hurt.
Oh,
I did a
okay.
couple in the same day. Yeah.
Well, that's good, at least. But he or she probably didn't pick a quarterback until Bryce Young. Is that correct?
Let's see. Jaden Daniels.
Oh, Jaden Daniels. Well, then you don't need 4. I don't know why you would do that.
Yeah, that person went quarterback crazy.
They went a little crazy there at the end. I think it's kind of fun if there isn't a Jaden Daniels on that team. Bryce Young starts. If you get May or McCarthy to start week 1 pre-injury, then you're kind of live there. One thing we talked about, and I know we're getting late, but discussing today is what to do with the quote onesie positions. And I think at tight end, I want to have one of the top 5 or 6 guys, which you did in this draft with Laporta, pretty much every time, especially on the FFPC where I play over there with 1.5 points per reception. But on Underdog too, I want to have one of those top 5 or 6 guys. Quarterback, I really don't care. Like, that is one where, because you have such an interesting group in the middle with Caleb Williams and Daniels and Tua, and you mentioned Herbert and Goff and, Deshaun Watson, even potentially. I don't need Allen, Hurts, Mahomes. I'll do it if I have the stack, but I don't feel like I have to do it. And tight end, I feel more like I have to do it.
Right. Yeah. The fall off of tight end after the top couple of guys is pretty severe. So before we wrap, another fantasy podcast show here on Purple Insider, grade me. What do you think? How'd I do?
Better. I don't want to go too far though, right? Because we'll maybe do another one of these.
Whoops! I switched that over to my email.
I don't know if
well,
I'll be reading your
that
emails.
That was the underdog ad read that I have to do. But let me move us back. Let me move us back here, and then
I'll give you a solid B on this.
Okay, I like it. Yeah.
It'll be your secret whether you got to round 5 and said, I need to draft wide receiver with the next 4 picks, no matter what, that's for
I'm
you
not
to
telling.
know. And no one else gets to know that, but you did it. And so in your first 8 picks, you have 5 receivers, one of whom is Jefferson. You have Kyron Williams, who's a top 6 running back selection. You have Laporta, who's 1 or 2. And then you have Richardson, who's top 6. So if your receivers if Cortland Sutton gets there for you and Samuel, guys like that, then you can win.
Okay. I feel like progress was made. I will have another draft for you to look at next week when we do the show. And a reminder to use the promo code PURPLE over at Underdog Fantasy for your special pick and first time deposit offer up to $250 of bonus cash. And a reminder that you must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. That's something that you have to do on
Hey,
the show.
can I please say one more thing?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
If I were to buy a Vikings mini, who's the player? I do, just so your viewers know, I do tend to lean older, like 70s, 80s, or even 60s. The Vikings were in Super Bowl 4. If there's a Super Bowl connection, I don't know which Vikings player was the best Super Bowl performer ever. I know Super Bowl 11 is their last appearance. And I'm not sure it would be Tarkenton. Maybe it would be Alan Page. I mean, that's a guy I have a ton of respect for. Or Carl Eller, who was on my show once at a Super Bowl. But I would be happy to hear suggestions on like who the right Viking is for a signed helmet.
So if you want to go a little bit offbeat and someone sort of goes, oh, really? That guy? Yeah, I remember that guy. Chuck Foreman, the spin doctor, for a little time there, one of the great running backs in history. And another one I would go with too, and I've been accused of underappreciating this guy in the annals of great wide receivers in Vikings history. Ahmad Rashad would be another good pick.
So both players with Buffalo ties.
Really? I knew Rashad. I didn't know that. Did Chuck Foreman play there?
No, Rashad did. Foreman got hit in the eye with a snowball on a run. It was the final game of the season, maybe 75. And somebody from the crowd hit him with a snowball. And I don't know this. I've never spoken with him, but like that was bad for him. I don't know what he did about that, but I know that happened. And Jay Foreman played for the Bills, 20, 25 years later, but good names.
Yeah. Two guys that maybe are a little underappreciated in Vikings history. The Deep End Fantasy Podcast is your show. Make sure you check that out. This was really fun. Again, looking forward to doing this every week. And I'm kind of counting down the days here till we can go week 1 games. Let's look at them. Cannot wait.
It's only 2 weeks. I mean, 2 weeks from today, we'll be talking about Ravens Chiefs tomorrow night. In the interim, the Deep End Invitational is, if I may, one of the toughest, best fantasy football tournaments anywhere. My partner and I, Adam Krautwurst on the Deep End, went for the very hardest format to use because, most of these drafts kind of look the same. So how do we build it in a way where people have really hard decisions to make? And we have some of the best, most popular names in fantasy football. We're on live. The second of our 4 drafts is Thursday night, the 22nd. I'm in that draft. And then next week, 28 and 29, both nights will have drafts. So if you want to see what that looks like, join us on the Deep End FF1.
The Deep End. Check it out. Mike, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks,
man.
Matthew.
Thank you.
Football.